Revolutionary greetings. This is Victor Coronado alongside Carlos Cruz Mosquera. We are Anti-Conquista. Please like, please share, please subscribe. Please tell your friends, your family members, etc. We can be found on all platforms, social media platforms, YouTube, Facebook, Twitter, Instagram. Again, this is Anti-Conquista. This is now the 14th episode of Nuestra America. This week's theme is Latin America, 21st century socialism, second independence, question mark. Comrade, how you doing?
Oh, good, comrade.
Good. Yeah, so let's get right into it. I mean, we had it's been an exciting 2 weeks. We had CELAC a week prior. I know you folks covered a lot of that stuff last week, so we're going to touch a little bit on that today. And then we had the UN General Assembly, the 73rd session of the General Assembly, which took place in New York. And those things happened back to back. And so there's a reason why we titled, this week's theme the way we did. Folks, the mainstream press is obviously not going to cover the stuff, which is why we're covering it. The capitalist press is not going to cover the stuff, which is why we're covering it. And this is significant. And this is the stuff that we've been talking about now forever, seemingly. There's a revolution happening in Latin America. No one seems to be paying attention. And so, again, this is why we're having this discussion. We're having this program. I wanna start off with Nicolás Maduro, Venezuelan President Nicolás Maduro's speech at the UN. Now, he wasn't physically there at the speech, at the UN, but he gave the speech, and I really encourage folks, if you get a chance, if you go on to venezuelaanalysis.com, they do have the whole speech. In fact, on the YouTube, on today's YouTube program, if you scroll down, we also provided a link where you can listen to the speech as well. But I did want to highlight some of the stuff that was said because I thought it was so good. So if folks could just allow me here, here we go. I'm just going to read part of it. I wish I could read the whole thing because it's so good. I really encourage folks to check that out. But here we go. That is why Venezuela is here. This is Nicolás Maduro speaking. That is why Venezuela is here today to say its truth. I bring the truth of a combative, heroic, and revolutionary world. I bring the voice of a homeland that, throughout history, has refused to surrender to injustice, to the empires of the past, slaver and colonialists, and the empires of today, equally slaver and neo-colonialists. I bring the voice of a heroic people that arose from the heroic resistance of the Aborigines, from the indigenous peoples that for centuries resisted the domination by colonial empires. I bring the voice of the people having the honor of being the great liberator Simón Bolívar's home, the most important leader of a generation of liberators of the Americas, who accomplished 200 years ago the heroic feat of founding a continent, a region, a dream, the independent republics of this world region. Venezuela is a historic people who is both a home and school of Republican values, a home and a school of rebelliousness, a home and a school of dignity and values such as equality, such as our obstinate homeland that for centuries has searched its independence and sovereignty. I speak on their behalf before this scenario, which has witnessed the most evil and embarrassing attacks in the last years, for our country is a harassed and attacked country. Yesterday, in this same place, the President of the United States of North America once again attacked the noble people of Venezuela and supported, as he said, the doctrine founded by the empire of the United States 200 years ago, which determined their interventionist role, their intended role of judge, party, and police of the world. I guess judge, jury, and execution of the world, the Monroe Doctrine. Yes, the president of the most powerful imperial nation, the United States of North America, was in this same place supporting James Monroe's doctrine, who at that time said America for Americans, meaning that the rest of America had to belong to them as the backyard for the interest of Washington elite groups that already conducted the configuration of that nation as a former colony of the British Empire. He supported the Monroe Doctrine. And you may be wondering about the reason for such fierce attack by the American empire, expressed at all levels by President Donald Trump. It is a historic conflict, as we have said to the world many times, as our people well know. It is a conflict between the interventionist, imperial, neo-colonialist Monroe Doctrine against the historic independence, Republican, Simón Bolivar's doctrine of rebelliousness, dignity, justice, liberty, and equality. It is an old conflict, an old contradiction due to an imperial doctrine aimed at dominating our region. I'm not going to continue on, but I mean, it's such a good speech. I recommend folks check it out. Carlos, your thoughts on that, and I want to talk about some of the other stuff that we saw over the last 2 weeks.
Yeah, no, it was an awesome speech, and I think also to give it context and the way we're pitching it today, as you know, are we seeing the resurgence towards a revolutionary resurgence towards a second independence of Latin America? And you know, I think our analysis is that yes, we are heading towards a second independence with strong leaders like Maduro, Castillo, and Díaz in Cuba. But before analyzing their speeches, I think it is important also to analyze the history of our region. Why are we talking about the second independence? You know, because we're not as people who are, you know, even very slightly interested in Latin American history and politics. Our region supposedly became free of the Spaniards in 200 years ago. And I guess symbolically, you know, Maduro and the rest of the revolutionary leaders, I think symbolically use Bolivar and the independence, the first independence movement, as you know, a symbolic movement that represents what we need to be striving towards, because 200 years ago was not our independence. We simply transferred the power on our continent transferred from the Spaniards who colonized us for hundreds of years to then the United States and Europe in tying us to their nascent capitalist economies, and who developed their economies through imperialism. The United States through you know, at that moment, through tying their economy to our economies, taking our natural resources, our labor, exploiting our people, and Britain as well. And it's a system that has continued on to today, and it's important to understand this because it's not just about colonialism. I know a lot of our people, especially in the US and also here in Europe to some extent, see colonization as the Spaniards taking our lands, imposing their culture and their names on us, their religion, and that is all true. We need to decolonize our names, our religion, the way we dress, the way we speak, all of that. I agree with it. I would say that I'm also an indigenous nationalist in that sense. But most importantly, we also need to understand that this is also an economic situation. You know, imperialism is that the global north, the US, Europe, continue to exploit us economically. They leech of our economies, of our people's work, of our resources. That's a materialist understanding or a materialist analysis of the situation in Latin America, which we can't forget. You know, we can't see it as, you know, because it is Marxism. Marxism has codified, I guess, you know, Marx didn't come up with a concept of communism. As we all should know, communism has been practiced by people around the world for thousands of years, but they codified it in language and they codified it as a science. And that's the materialist understanding that we need together, combined with our indigenous nationalism, with our Black nationalism, with our Latin American nationalism, or our sense of Latin American identity needs to be combined, intertwined with you know, a view to progress in terms of our material reality, of our material conditions, and that's what Maduro, Castillo, and Díaz are basically saying at the UN. But yeah, maybe we can go into a bit more detail in terms of their speeches.
No, absolutely. I'm glad that you mentioned. You know, I wasn't initially thinking about bringing that into the discussion, but now that we're on the topic, I think it's. I mean, of course, it ties into what to this, and that's essentially what in not so many words, it's essentially what they're also talking about, right? It's to be able to control their own resources, to be able to be in control of the way their economies are managed. Because for folks that don't know, I had a conversation. Some people called it a debate, or what? It was a conversation with someone by the name of Dust James, who's a protege of Caleb Maupin, and it was a great conversation. And then I took to Facebook and sort of doubled down, and folks challenged me on the definition of the word proletariat. So folks can check that out, and can go to my Facebook and see that. And I'll concede, if we I talked to let's say an old Marxist OG who's an academic and someone who's been part of the struggle for a long time, and he said, look, Victor, during the times of Marx, they sort of casually mentioned service and distribute, really service, but yes, during that time proletariat was more defined as folks who were part of the means of production. But my state, so even if I concede and say, okay, service sector employees and service sector and distribution employees are part of the proletariat, let's say I go ahead and concede that, it doesn't negate what I originally said to Dust James and what I said on Facebook, which is the following, which is what you're speaking to, which is that raw materials are found in Africa and Latin America. They're found in the global South. They're found in the third world. Productive forces, by and large, are in the third world. So if we were to have some sort of socialist revolution here in the United States, that's not going to, it doesn't automatically mean that, if you've said this plenty of times, imperialism is not just going to magically go away. This system, this economic system is parasitic. It needs to plunder. It needs to exploit. I looked at I went to the World Bank and I looked up some data. I think it's like 80% now of the U.S. economy is service sector and distribution. So where is our stuff being made that we consume? It's not being made here in the United States. It's being made elsewhere in the third world. And how that ties into this is actually perfect, because these Latin American leaders, through socialism, right, through taking state power, are saying we need to control our economies, and we're not going to be here to just, the U.S. is no longer going to be able to just do whatever the fuck it wants with us. And this was just fascinating. Let me go back now. So CELAC, for folks that don't know, CELAC is a community of Latin American and Caribbean states. It intentionally, this was created there under Hugo Chavez. And this was created as a way of to combat the Organization of American States, which has long been an imperial tool, and so it intentionally excludes the United States and Canada on purpose. Like, we don't. It's not you're not invited. You're not invited to the. Now, Brazil was originally included, and last year, President Jair Bolsonaro just said we're not part of this, right? So whatever. So a couple weeks ago on September 18th, CELAC meets. It happens in Mexico City. Just a few days prior to the summit, Mexico celebrating its 211 years of independence. So what does AMLO do, the president of Mexico, as his honorary guest? You know who he invites? He invites President Miguel Díaz Canel while they're having the military parade, which is the annual parade that they have to celebrate. This is more than symbolic. This is AMLO saying to U.S. imperialism, we're not afraid anymore. Go fuck yourselves. This type of stuff is unheard of, prior to, 20 years ago, right? So he invites Miguel Díaz-Canel as a special guest, condemns the U.S. blockade. Then they have the summit. And then he recognizes Maduro as the official legitimate president of Venezuela because he is, right? And meanwhile, the U.S. and former colonial powers in the West still consider Juan Guaido the president of Venezuela, right? So so Maduro travels to Mexico City. The first time he travels abroad. I didn't even know this. It was the first time he traveled abroad after being accused by the United States as being a narco trafficker and involved in drug dealing and all that. So he gets a seat at the table, and not only does he get a seat at the table, he starts making a bunch of proposals, right? Which CELAC is now taken very seriously, to try to strengthen and buttress it and give it more teeth, because they're trying to create, Latin American leaders are trying to create this new thing, right? To say the hell with the U.S. And it gets even more interesting and I know you folks talked about it last week, but it's important to bring this up. China's not present, right? But they send a video of solidarity. They send a video of solidarity saying, we're going to continue to work with you folks. We're going to, and it's not just platitude. China is now essentially the number one trade partner for most of Latin America. And the United States is worried about it. There's another article I looked up this past week. Axios, this is a headline from Axios. U.S. friends in Latin America are turning to China. And they talked to an Ecuadorian ambassador or diplomat. I forget. I have it up here on my screen. There's a quote there that says, it's amazing that the United States has just ignored the region for so long. It's not that they've ignored the region; they have not. It's just that they haven't been they dismiss us. They don't give a fuck about us. The United States' only interest in Latin America and the Caribbean is to exploit our people and to plunder and loot our resources. I'll stop there, but I'll let you respond. But all of this stuff is just fascinating.
Yeah, for sure. And it's not to say, I think it's important to highlight, and I do try to highlight this. As socialists, we support Venezuela, Cuba, Peru, particularly Venezuela, Peru, Bolivia. We give them critical support, which means we don't think, and they know that themselves. They know that they're moving towards socialism. We're not saying these are the perfect states or the ideal states. I don't think we can have an ideal Latin American socialist state when imperialism still exists as the dominant, as the world economy. So it's impossible to have that ideal state or close to that ideal state that we want in Latin America. However, they're moving towards it. And that's exactly what Maduro, Castillo, and Díaz Canel, that's what we can detect in their speeches at CELAC and in their speeches at the UN. Particularly, you see Maduro, the urgency. You didn't see this from Biden with his very sterile rhetoric on climate change. Maduro was going in terms of climate change. The something that we all need to be taken seriously as the question of the world's future is at hand, and you see this in Maduro's speech. We need to halt these corporations who are at the front of climate change. We need to combat that, and also demanding that the global north, the ones who produce, you saw this in Castillo's speech as well, the ones who produce the most emissions and who contribute to climate change the most, the northern nations need to keep to their what they've agreed to at the climate conferences, and so many other things, that we can pick up from their speeches, which talks to a transformation of the world, a socialist, a revolutionary transformation of the world. I think, to be very honest, I think that they could have been a bit more confrontational in terms of bringing out the fact that we're fighting against capitalism. I think that could have been brought out a bit more. This is class war, whether we like to, and they have to be very diplomatic at these speeches at the UN, but that needs to be brought out a bit more. I think the chair Fidel have in the past been way more radical in their explaining and dismantling the capitalist system, the world capitalist system, at these events, at these speeches. I think that could have been, that could have shown a bit more in the speeches, but the message was there. We need to transform the world. We need to end racism. We need to, in Castillo's speech, he's talking about gender inequality and going into great detail about what we need to do. It's not just the identity politics stuff, or the a simple the white feminist agenda that we see in the West. No, it's about social inclusion. It's about social equality for women, about economic equality for women, and so on. And Castillo, the Peruvian president, has promised to tackle that in Peru and so on. So this is we're talking about the forefront really of the struggle to transform the world into a socialist world in Latin America, and these Latin American leaders are really leading the way in the world to be straight up.
Absolutely. I'm reading some of the the comments here, and that's correct. The president of China actually sent a video himself. It was the president himself who sent a video. I want to go over some of the I want to highlight some of the things that took place over the last couple of weeks. So going back to CELAC, Colombian President Iván Duque actually canceled his participation last minute in protest to Maduro's attendance. That was interesting. Also, there was a lot of
talk. By the way, this is a guy that has something like 70% unapproval from the Colombian public.
Right. But he wants to call out Maduro for not being, for not being democratic or whatever. Right. Some other things, and I know you folks touched on it a little bit last week, but I think it was just, again, it's worth noting that Maduro ended up challenging both the Uruguayan and Paraguayan president, and he actually challenged both of them to a debate. He said, just give us the date, the time, I'll be there and I'll challenge you to debate. There was a lot of talks of replacing the OAS with CELAC. Bolivian President Luis Arce said the OAS no longer represents us. I don't know if it ever did, but he said the OAS no longer represents us. Other interests enter into decisions of what happens at the OAS. And then President Nicolás Maduro said the following: it is the old debate, I know you folks said this, between Monroeism and Bolivarianism, between Latin America and the Caribbean, our America and the other America, the Imperial America. AMLO suggested a Latin American economic community resembling the EU. You had Caribbean nations defend Cuba. The Prime Minister of Dominica, he said the following: without Cuba, every single Caribbean country would have had great difficulty in fighting this COVID-19 pandemic. We have Cuban doctors, nurses, and technicians working in our hospitals, so on and so forth. The Prime Minister of St. Lucia said the following: we thank the government and the people of Cuba for their support with medical personnel, particularly now during the COVID-19 pandemic. We salute the heroic people of Cuba and Venezuela and look toward an improvement in quality of life in their countries. CELAC also created a resolution in support of decolonization of Puerto Rico. In Puerto Rico, the pro-independence organizations, they rejoiced and were elated to hear about this. Miguel Díaz-Canel also raised the issue of Puerto Rican independence at CELAC, so did others. At the UN, you had a doubling down of that as well, as Miguel Díaz-Canel also brought up the question of Puerto Rico and Puerto Rican decolonization and independence. Miguel Díaz-Canel, stuck it to the U.S. empire by being in support of Venezuela, Belarus, Syria, et cetera, et cetera. A Bolivian president, now going back to, again, the UN, Bolivian President Luis Arce denounced the OAS for its role in the 2019 coup attempt. Again, here's Bolivian president in New York at the UN General Assembly, pretty much again giving a finger to the United States, saying, we know what the fuck's going on. We know you folks, without saying it, we know you folks are behind this shit, And then somebody mentioned in the comments, this was fascinating. I saw no coverage of this almost anywhere, right? A caucus was created called the Ministerial Meeting of the Group of Friends in Defense of the United Nations Charter. It's a mouthful, but essentially they also call it the UN Anti-Sanctions Group. Here's who's part of the group. And this was significant because it was held in the on Venezuelan turf at the UN. Venezuela is a part of this. Algeria, Angola, Belarus, Bolivia, Cambodia, China, Cuba, the Democratic People's Republic of Korea, Equatorial Guinea, Iran, Laos, the People's Democratic I already said that. Nicaragua, Palestine, and I know that's but folks represent the Palestinian people were there. Russia, St. Vincent and the Grenadines, and Syria. I mean, that's fascinating. They got together. They're conspiring right at the UN, trying to figure out how to counter U.S. hegemonic forces. right? I mean, and this is why, and I always say, you folks hear me say this all the time, there's utility in everything. We can condemn the UN. I understand the UN has had let's just say a mixed history, if you will. And I'm being polite. But there's a reason why everyone goes to the UN and does what they do. And there's a reason why these leaders get together. It's a way to put things on record, and it's a way for these leaders to get together and continue these acts of solidarity and continue to organize themselves. So again, there is utility at the UN with regards to the UN. I'll stop there, but again, this was just really fascinating stuff. Before we get to the headlines, I will talk about one other thing to sort of provide a little bit more context. But any response to what I just said there?
Yeah, I also think that we need to also look at these speeches in context, because it's difficult watching these speeches, which again I think even the socialist leaders, even though of course a lot of the stuff that they've said is on point, but they do have to be very diplomatic, and some more than others. Like as I said, like in the past, we know Fidel, Chavez, and so on have been less diplomatic and have put it on the empire, more in a more straightforward manner. But you do see the separation of the imperialist countries and the neo-colonial countries against the revolutionary and socialist countries of the world. You see the Venezuelan leader, the Peruvian leader, the Bolivian leader, all talking about a unity among the global South, unity among the oppressed peoples. And then you see Biden talking about we need to support the protesters in Venezuela, in Cuba, and so on. So it's just to say, there's a class division, there's a global class division, and the global North. The global North are really the gatekeepers of capitalism, the dominant, the leaders of capitalism in the world. And the global South, particularly, obviously, the countries that we mentioned are the leaders in terms of trying to transform, to overcome the system. So yeah, we just need to continue supporting them and educating ourselves in terms of what we can do to solidify this movement and play our part as a diaspora. This is something that we always emphasize in our group and our organization is, what are we going to do? How are we going to play a part in this movement?
Yeah, and I see that Karina, hello. I see Karina's in the comment section. She said, USA has already been exposed for funding a soft coup to remove AMLO, the president of Mexico, via funneling millions through the U.S. embassy to corrupt opposition parties who ruled for 100 years before the Morena party.
Can I just quickly add to that as well? Yeah. And that's a great point. And I think you're starting to see that the U.S. is moving towards more to less military stuff and more like the Europeans, who are very refined in their imperialism. They know they don't need to militarily invade a country. What they need to do is funnel money to these parties, as Karina's saying, these right-wing parties, not just parties, but NGOs, supposedly independent media organizations, is what they did in Cuba. So this is what they call soft imperialism. But even though it has that name, soft imperialism, the end result is the same: hard imperialism, which is the looting of our resources via neo-colonial leaders, neo-colonial puppets. Our own people who are in power thanks to the support they get from the US or from Europe. They come to power and is the continuation of the same shit, except it's our, the face of it is our own people. So we're confused. We think, oh, it's fucking corruption. Oh, these leaders are corrupt. No, we need to understand the system. It's not about corruption really. And the whole corruption thing is big in Latin America. Everybody says we need to combat corruption. No, what we need to combat is capitalism, imperialism. What we need to do is change the economic structure, the political structures in our countries, in our homelands, to be able to combat the empire, which is, they're transforming themselves. They're adapting to the times. They're trying to adapt to the time. You know, there's a conversation about, is the US falling or are they getting stronger? They are falling. I think in our analysis, they are on the back foot right now. The global South, the third world countries, socialist countries are fighting back. They're taking back their economies slowly, not completely, but slowly they're taking back their economies. And what that means is that as the global South progresses, the global North, the imperialist core, the US, Europe, go back. They start to lose out. Their economies start to experience crisis because our people, the global South, as they progress, the North goes back. The North suffers from it. So they need to adapt, and that's what the US is doing. You see in Afghanistan, they're saying, you know, we withdraw the troops. Well, but what are they doing to replace that? They're not just withdrawing the military. At the same time that they're withdrawing the military, they're making billions available in terms of NGO money, which is going to go to groups who control who dominate policy, who lobby governments, or who build up political power in those regions to create a neo-colonial state, a puppet state that they can control. And that's what they're starting to do.
And it's great that you mentioned this, because these are all acts of war without using the military, right? And in certain instances, you know, we know that, what is it? The Southern Command, the ties with the Colombian military and security forces. That it's not like they're dismissing that completely. But you're right. It's a different form of imperialism. And what's really crazy about this is because this stuff doesn't get covered by the capitalist press, and the average, let's say, just average American, even many Latinos who don't study this stuff. And this is why we do these programs. And this is why we keep mentioning the OAS. I saw somebody mention NED, National Endowment for Democracy, the USAID. We're going to keep mentioning these things over and over and over so people become familiar with these organizations and institutions and names. So these are all acts of war. I asked the question, what Latin American Caribbean nation tries to fuck with the US, tries to meddle with the internal politics and self-determination of the United States? It doesn't happen. And what people need to understand, and I try to drive this point home all the time to folks, is that by meddling and by getting involved in the way that the US does, it changes the trajectory. It changes the history completely of a nation, right? The fact that the United States empire's tentacles are all over Latin America, these things have an effect, and they change the political trajectory. And while people have been fighting for socialism, via arms or by foot, by going to the polls, you're not, once we take power over the state, we've said this plenty of times before, you don't create socialism under ideal conditions. And then you wonder why folks are paranoid and some of the things happen in Latin America, like in Venezuela or like in Nicaragua, because the United States just doesn't stop fucking with us. They don't stop. They never stop. And this idea that, well, yeah, but no, there is no yeah, but no Latin American Caribbean nation does this to the United States. No one. There's no history of it. There's no documentation of it.
And Victor, another thing that it's important, and it's a discussion we've been having in lots of our material that we've been putting out recently is the fact that the left in the West, which includes us, unfortunately, us Latin Americans, we need to begin to stand up for ourselves. We need to start building our own strong movement. Yes, integrated to the rest of the Western left, but educating and imposing our own understanding, which is that imperialism isn't just military, which is a very one-dimensional view of imperialism. It's not just the military and US corporation and multinationals doing wrong here and there in the global South. No, it's the whole economy of the US, the whole economy of Europe, who leeches off the global South entirely. The whole global system is based on an unequal relationship to an unequal relationship where the global North leases of the global South. It's not just about, you know, what you guys call the military
industrial complex.
It's not just about that, which is what the Western left focuses on, because it's the most obvious part of imperialism. Right. We have to begin to talk about the economy, the world economy, how that relates to our people, how that oppresses our people. And once we begin to understand that more fully, we begin to understand these things like NED, USAID, how they meddle in our politics, how they solidify the economic systems that exist, the unequal economic systems that exist, and how they impede our people, us, including us, the diaspora. They impede us from understanding our reality and understanding that we need to combat imperialism as a primary contradiction, not as a secondary contradiction, which is, you know, usually what the Western left, the Western Marxists pose it as.
And I think that, you know, I'm gonna just say, I think the reason why, we've talked about this before, there's a material interest behind this, and people are not willing to say what we're willing to say, which is that if you're really against imperialism, then you have to be willing to make extreme sacrifices. And progressives and so-called, you know, revolutionaries and communists and socialists don't want to face that reality. That yes, and don't want to say that by living here in the United States, I benefit materially by being here. You know, we benefit. There's no other way that you can't deny that reality. There's just no, I don't know how anyone could seriously deny that reality. And that's not to say that you don't have these internal contradictions, which are accelerating and which are pushing people more into poverty, into homelessness, so on and so forth. Because those are the internal contradictions that are existing here in the United States. I don't know what's happening too much out there in the UK, but here in the United States, for sure, this country is becoming more decadent. It's a fake. I call it a fake economy, because there's going to be another economic either disaster or recession or something. It's just they're going to continue to push different levers, and I say they, the capitalists, the capitalist ruling class. But this idea that we're not benefiting, I mean, I will say it again, we're largely a service sector and distribution economy. That means that other people are making our stuff. You know, there's now, you know, tying into this whole thing of the UN and CELAC, something that kept coming up is the vaccinations. So Biden is again saying, yeah, we're going to donate, you know, X amount of vaccines. Meanwhile, the rest of the world is saying to the first world, the third world is saying to the first world, stop hoarding vaccines. Stop. Literally, that's been a thing. It's like, you guys aren't doing enough. You didn't do enough in the beginning. You were hoarding vaccines in the beginning, and we're suffering because of it. So, I mean, you can't deny that reality. That's not something that we made up over here at Ethnic Conquista. This is what's been happening.
Whilst Biden was talking about, you know, we're donating these vaccines to the rest of the world, Castillo, the Peruvian president, was like, we need universal access to those vaccines.
Yes.
You need to get rid of those patents and make it available to the rest of the world. But yeah, there you see the global divide, global apartheid, this unequal relationship that we go on about between the global North, the imperial core, and the global South. It affects every aspect of society, every aspect of our reality, including healthcare and you know, the pandemic.
Absolutely. Just to provide a little bit more context, right? So all this stuff is happening. So a lot of exciting stuff happening over the last couple of weeks. Meanwhile, the U.S. Congress approves an increased $768 billion Pentagon budget, rejecting calls to cut the military spending. Meanwhile, two different organizations have been created. I don't know, Carlos, if you've seen this, but there's one called I don't know how to, you know, it's AUKUS. I recommend. Matter of fact, let me pull this up for the audience. And I know some folks are going to be listening to this on on SoundCloud and whatnot, but you could just Google this when you get a chance. AUKUS, and I'm going to go ahead and pull up this. Give me just a second here. This is right off of Google, but if it's in the news, but there are a bunch of headlines, and here it is. It's a trilateral security pact between Australia, the UK, and the United States, announced on the September 15th for the Indo-Pacific region. Under the pact, the US and UK will help Australia to acquire nuclear-powered submarines. I'm not going to get into the whole, there's much more that we can get into there, but there's this organization that was just created. Then there's also this thing called the Quad now. It's not a formal military alliance. Again, Google that, like Quad, like your quadriceps, your quad muscle. The US, Japan, India, and Australia. It's not a formal military alliance, but essentially that's what it is. That's essentially that's what it is. And so, the United States is just very clever at just, looking, kind of surveying the landscape, and saying, okay, what's going on? Because look, the reality is that China's becoming a superpower, and they can't stop it. They really can't stop it, and they're trying to figure out how to stop it. And it's a threat. It's a quote unquote existential threat, not to us living in the U.S. or in the UK or in the global South and the third world, but to the capitalists, right? And so, I encourage folks to try to keep an eye on this stuff, because
Victor,
it's a threat.
Sorry to interrupt, but and there you see the hypocrisy of the U.S. as well. Biden at the UN talking about peace, that we need world unity, so and so, and this is the shit they're doing. What they're doing with this program is really provoking China. You're meddling in their fucking region. Like, leave them alone. And as socialists, as internationalists, we, whatever criticisms you may have, I think us as anti-conquista, we have a critical support for China, but it's not our place. It's not our place to condemn them, and it is our place as internationalists and anti-imperialists to support their efforts to push back this alliance, this imperialist alliance. Really is what it is. The imperial core, trying to fight back China and the threats that they feel it's a threat to exactly as you say, Victor. It's a threat to the capitalist rather than anybody else. Really, to us, to the rest of the world, to the diaspora, to the global South, China isn't a threat. China, instead, despite its flaws, we're critical. Despite its flaws, it's the what they have achieved in terms of poverty reduction, and the material conditions of their people is something that we need to look to try and replicate in our homeland with our own history, with our own culture, with our own characteristics. Like Latin American socialism with Latin American characteristics. But yeah, this is something that we definitely need to combat. And yeah, if we're anti-imperialists and if we're internationalists.
And that's why I find very curious as to how you can call yourself even a progressive or a socialist or communist and not defend China. I just don't understand that, because a world without China right now is a scary place. And guess what? The global South right now, there's a nexus there between the global South and China. And China is they're not putting a gun to our heads, right? They're not saying they're going to invade us militarily. They're offering economic development and help and mutual aid, and without the threat of military invasion. And so this idea that China is not it's a bizarre position to have, to condemn China and not be supportive of China. And this new,
Another important thing to do with the UN speeches, I think it was at the UN that Xi Jinping announced that they were going to
that's right,
completely halt their coal mining in the rest of the world, not in China, but in the rest of the world.
Right.
And that's more than the sterile speech of Biden, talking about, we're going to do this and that for 2050. And what are you going to do right now? And China, again, showing that they're willing to do shit right now urgently.
Yeah, notice we're not talking too much about President Joe Biden's speech. There's, I read it. It's a bunch of what I would say empty rhetoric and platitudes. It's just a bunch of nothing. There's literally nothing there that excites you. That's just a bunch of bullshit, right? Coming from the U.S. president. Anything else before we get into the headlines on this topic of again, Latin America, 21st century socialism, second independence?
Second independence. I hate to be a parrot and repeat myself over and over again every time in these lives, but it's the heroic creation that Mariátegui would talk about. We don't want to be under colonial rule. We don't want to be under imperial rule. We also don't want to copy Soviet socialism. We don't want to copy Chinese socialism or Vietnamese or anything. We want to create. We want to bring about the transformation of our homelands, of our people, according to our own realities, according to our own history, according to our own conditions, and this is something that we need to be proud of. And this is something that Chavez, Maduro, the Venezuelans are leading us. Not necessarily in a, there are things to criticize. Venezuela isn't a socialist economy right now. They're heading towards it. They're fighting. There's a struggle there between the socialists and the capitalists. The capitalists still exist in Venezuela. They still have power, and they're constant. They're in this constant dialectical battle to win power. And eventually, if we all come together and support it, Venezuela will be a truly socialist society. I think Cuba is closer and closer to that, and Bolivia and so on. And these are all nations that we need to be proud of, that we need to look to, and that we need to build on. These aren't finished products. These aren't the ideal societies that, it isn't the Jehovah's Witness picture that they use yet. We need to work towards it. We need to, make sure that us, young Latin Americans, young Marxists, apply our understanding of Marxism, our understanding of decolonization to our realities as a diaspora, and look into the homeland, and contributing to it. I think the emphasis is always on contributing to it. It's not enough to talk about it. It's not even enough to be, the activist, the Western activist out protesting. And I think that, or the identity politics activist is what I'm trying to say, that the very superficial activism that we see in this part of the world, that's always, very much about talk and very little about action. Whereas in Latin America and the rest of the world, the rest of the global South, we see a combination of both. Theoretical understanding, talking that we want a transformation of society, and at the same time simultaneously contributing tangibly to that transformation of society. And us as a Latin American diaspora, as a Latin American diaspora, we need to be part of that. We need to become part of this movement to transform society materially. And then at the same time, I think it's important also because in the West, when we talk about decolonization, especially among our people, as we were saying at the beginning, it's always very much about like cultural decolonization, decolonizing our names. We don't, we reject the colonial religions that were imposed on us. And that's all great. That's all simultaneous, but it has to be simultaneous with tangible material change for our people in the diaspora and in the homeland. So yeah, that's what I would say. I think in order to do that, we need to study the speeches of Maduro, Castillo, Díaz, Canel in the UN, study it, and then see, all right, how are we going to apply what they're saying? How are we going to contribute? What are we going to do to strengthen Cuban socialism, Venezuelan socialism, Bolivian socialism? And how are we going to contribute at the same time to strengthening the diaspora communism, diaspora socialism, which is what we really need right now. There isn't a Latin American socialist movement that is solidified, that is coherent. There's a lot of us spread out. We need to strengthen ourselves as a diaspora, and let the UN speeches by these by our revolutionary leaders in Latin America be a symbol for this, or an inspiration for this, for the consolidation of us as a socialist and Marxist Latin Americans living in the West. We need to really become part of this movement, or we're just going to be fucking passers-by, standing by, watching the world revolve around us, and having little to say and doing nothing to transform the world as we need to.
Camarada, that was well said. I don't have anything to add to that. I mean, that was just well said, well put. And I will do a little shameless plug, but this is important. This is where, for folks who donate to Anticonquista, we appreciate that, because that's what Carlos is talking about, that, we try to contribute in that way, right? We try to support progressive and socialist revolutionary groups in Latin America. But that was well said.
Can I also add that we, and to be even more specific, Telejaguar, we need to support movements and join them, support them materially and join them as well. Telejaguar, Unión del Barrio, was it Raza Unida that Karina mentioned the other day? Mm-hmm. The African People's Revolutionary Party, Uhuru movement, which I think is the same thing.
Right.
Look all these movements up. The Troika Collective, which I know do great work. We don't always see eye to eye ideologically, but we support their work. Who else? There's just so many groups that we need to, or even as we said before in the last live as well, if you don't like any of them, create your own. But we need to be active. We need to be active and join us, Anticonquista, as well.
Yeah, we need to build this anti-imperialist movement within the imperial core, for sure, absolutely.
The Chao Collective.
That's another one.
The work that they're doing in terms of helping people understand, really dismantling the imperialist propaganda against China, in such an important way. Yeah, absolutely.
So let's that was a great segment there. Let's get right into some of the headlines. Here we go. Cuba. In Cuba, they should their goal now is to reach 90% immunization by mid-November and full immunization by the end of the year. And so they're on pace. They now have manufactured enough vaccines, it looks like, at this point. Here's something that's interesting. So remember recent reports highlighting Cuba's troubles in handling the pandemic and how the West immediately jumped on that. That was right after July 11th. And all of a sudden, even though they were initially getting praised, then all of a sudden it became a problem as they saw a spike, like everyone else saw a spike. Well, guess what? Cuba is now reopening up their economy as they continue to immunize their population. Restaurants, shopping centers, and beaches are beginning to reopen. They're reaching sort of a new normal in Cuba, and so that's music to our ears. But we knew that this would happen. We knew that Cuba would have that under control. We knew that Cuba would eventually get to this point. And of course, the manufactured, orchestrated July 11th protests, which Miguel Díaz Canel denounced at the UN, didn't help, right? Because again, there was just a media onslaught that we saw take place through Western capitalist press, and they jumped on all over Cuba because of their quote unquote. All of a sudden, their handling of the pandemic was a problem. But again, we knew that was just manufactured and fabricated. Not to say that they didn't have any problems, but so did the rest of the world, including the United States, including places like Brazil, which is a U.S. Ally, places like Colombia and Peru before Castillo took power, et cetera, et cetera. I don't know if you had any thoughts on that before I go into the next headline.
Yeah, and again, to point out that Cuba has done all of this in considering that they're under a blockade. Under a blockade. And then you have countries like Colombia, Brazil, the rest of the Latin America who are neo-colonies of the US and who have all their support, but they're not able to provide the very basic medical needs of people in a pandemic.
It's the only Latin American Caribbean nation that's been able to produce its own homegrown vaccine. Right. The only one, and they not have come up with one. They got two different vaccines that have over 90% efficacy.
Yeah, and it just shows again, like emphasizing what does the socialist government of Cuba do? They focus on the people, on bettering the conditions of the people, especially in healthcare. Historically we know that Cuba has always focused so much of their economic resources into healthcare, and you see that right now, and you see that's why they're advancing out of this pandemic, whereas in other places that have such rich economies, the miracle economy of Colombia, who that grows every year, but for what fucking reason?
Right.
What good is it that your economy is growing every fucking year if you can't even deal with this pandemic, put enough resources into bettering the lives of people or alleviating the impact of coronavirus on your people? It's ridiculous. And it just talks to the fact that we need to, like Cuba, think about different development, different ways of we can develop economically by focusing on the advance of the people, advancing the conditions of the people, rather than the advancing or economic growth for its own sake, which is the logic of capitalism.
Absolutely. I see. I'm getting distracted here. A little bit in a good way. I'm seeing folks interact with Karina. Shout out to Karina again. She's so dope. We will have hopefully some good news for folks who enjoyed having seen and heard Karina over the last couple weeks, but there's nothing official yet, but it's almost there, right? So Karina told Matt that he owes me a message. I'm waiting on a response. So I'll do this. I'll do this on the live and just say Matt owes me a response. I'm still waiting, so I'm waiting on you folks. But if folks like Karina, hopefully we're going to see more of her in the near future. I'm not going to say anything else. Moving on to the next headline. I thought this was hilarious. This next headline. So a CIA officer said to have Havana Syndrome on a trip to India. Roughly 200 U.S. foreign officials have reported to have Havana Syndrome, which is marked by migraines, nausea, memory lapses, ear ringing, and dizziness. Now Western media outlets are suggesting Russia is to blame after initially blaming the Cubans, as it was first reported in Havana in 2016. So just for folks who don't understand what's going on. So, U.S. foreign diplomats are in Havana 2016. They start having all these symptoms, and of course, the initial response of the West was that, well, the Cubans are doing something right to to create this weird Havana Syndrome thing that's happening, that, you know, these people are now, they're having these migraines and they can't think, and they, you know, their ears are ringing, and all these weird symptoms are just propping up. But it was apparently it was the Cubans, right? But now Havana Syndrome, the Cubans must be really good at this, because it's all over the place now. Everywhere CIA and foreign officials and diplomats go all over the world, they're starting to get this Havana Syndrome. So either Cuba's really good at doing this, or something else is going on. Who the heck knows what's going on? Look, I don't know. I laugh at this. I don't have much pity for these folks. I'm sorry to say that, because they're doing the work of the empire. So I
saw a meme that said that it's really that the diplomats in these places are blaming their hangovers on That's what they do. They're out there partying, having a good time. The U.S. administration's asking them, like, you know, what work have you guys done? And the U.S. diplomats are like, oh no, we can't do any work because of the Havana, Havana Syndrome shit.
Right. You know, every time this thing comes up, I gotta sort of laugh at this stuff. But anyways, I thought that was hilarious.
No proof, no evidence either.
Right,
they provided no evidence for, you know, to prove what they've been saying. If you're gonna come out and say something like that, you know, bring the proof.
Right.
How are you gonna just claim? You know, it's
now, but now they're suggesting it's the Russians that are doing it. But no, I haven't seen anyone provide any proof. It's just, we strongly suspect, right? You know, you always use that legal language. Strongly suspect, you know, that, you know, the Russians are behind this now, with providing no evidence. Just, it's now the Russians. It was the Cubans, now it's the Russians. But anyways, I say to those folks, you should have found a different line of work. But anyways, moving on to Mexico. Again, you have, you know, this is where we become a little critical of AMLO. But then at the same time, you know, he does this game where he does one thing and then he does another thing. And it's kind of like, but here's the headline. So two headlines. Mexican officials are urging Haitian migrants at the Mexico-Texas border to come inland and request asylum from a different location. While at the same time, there's a header over at the Detroit Press, Free Press headline, Detroit Free Press newspaper, online publication. Here's the header. You are free, you are home, Haitian migrants to be offered residency permits by Mexico. So in that article, you know, there's a Mexican official that says, you know, if you're not going to get arrested, we're not going to detain you. We will offer you, I guess, some sort of asylum, if you will. So, you know, again, here's the AMLO administration saying to these folks, hey, just get back over here. And by the way, you know, we'll take care of you. So, you know, I'll wait for your response.
You know, it's difficult, and you know, always, I guess, bringing it back to the context. You know, why are Haitians in this position to begin with? And you know, again, like, I don't want to be a parrot, but you know, it's the same bullshit that the U.S., the West in general, have done to the rest of our nations, that force our migration, which, you know, have created the conditions for this Haitian migration to the U.S. via Mexico and so on. So, and you know, in terms of AMLO, as we always say in the show, we recognize the good shit that him and his administration do, while at the same time acknowledging that, you know, that it's not a socialist state. I think, you know, as we've been saying, the rest of the nations that we've been talking about, Cuba, Venezuela, Bolivia, they're on their way. You know, they're like, you know, some of them a bit further than others. I think Mexico's right at the start, at the beginning of you know, trying to make progress towards socialism, but it's really in its baby stages. And unfortunately, in this stage, you're going to see a lot of contradictions.
Right.
But yeah, we do have to acknowledge the good shit that they do. And not just this with the Haitian migrants that they're saying they're going to put up in hotels and stuff, but also in terms of regional unity, bringing the region's progressive leaders together and trying to oppose the OAS and so on.
Right. Yeah, I'm personally very supportive of AMLO, understanding that, again, as you said, they're probably in the beginning stages of something. So again, I always make the reference to chess. I play chess all the time. They're just starting to move the pieces, right? And so you're playing this constant game, understanding that you don't have a complete revolutionary dictatorship, a socialist dictatorship in Mexico. So that's going to come with a lot of compromises. And again, if anybody who's done any politics before, you have to make very cold, calculated decisions and very crass decisions, while thinking long term, right? And so again, that's not to make excuses for the guy. I'm just saying that this is just their reality. And then I probably should have led with Haiti, and I do apologize. But I mean, by now I think everyone has seen the images. I'm gonna be honest, Carlos, I don't know how you felt about this. I didn't mention this to the compañeros in the chat, in our private chat that we have. I had a hard time opening up any of the article. They're obviously, the whole world saw the images. I had a hard time opening up the articles. I really didn't read any of the articles until later on in the week, because just because of the images. And obviously, like, the capitalist press jumped all over this thing as well. And I think that they were looking for this sensationalist news story, because your mind does immediately go to, right, the first thing you think about is slavery, right, when you see those images. So I had a hard time just opening up any of the articles, because everyone had the image so I kept, every time I would get on my phone, one of those, what are they called, the alerts or whatever, I just couldn't do it. But what are your thoughts on the images that we saw, on what took place there at the border? I'm obviously putting it up now, and it's, again, it's for me, it was very hard to just, again, kind of get through any of the article just because of the images. But your thoughts on what took place there?
It's interesting because I was listening to Colombian radio the other day, and they were interviewing a border patrol guy that I think is one of the representatives for these people in the US, and he was saying, they asked him, like, oh, why were they whipping these Haitian migrants on their horses? And he was like, he got so mad and annoyed. He's like, that's false. Those aren't whips. Those are what they hit the horses with. So they weren't whipping the and it just, they fail to understand, like, it. Okay, fine, you weren't whipping them with that, but we clearly see that they were using their horses to drive these people away from wherever they were trying to go, as if they were cattle, regardless if they were using those whips or not. And it brings the imagery, just brings out the fact that this is a settler colonial state that hasn't changed in hundreds of years of its existence, and it's a symbol, it's a representation of why we as a people of the global South, as allies of the Haitian people, in solidarity with Haitian people and Black people in the Americas, must combat this the U.S. state, and all colonial states that exist in the Americas. This is a perfect example. It's not the only example. And again, going back to what we were saying at the beginning, we have to look at the economy to understand how colonialism, imperialism works in Latin America and the Americas in general. But this is a good example. It's a good example of how it continues visually. This white guy on his horse, driving out black people as if they were animals, you know. Yeah, it is a really distressing scene. And again, always us as anti-conquista, always trying to be pragmatic in our approach. We can't just be angry that these border patrol people are doing this. We have to be angry and see, all right, what the fuck are we gonna do about this? You know, what can we do for the Haitian people to support them? Not what we can do for them as looking at it as saviors, or that we, you know, or looking to see what NGO and humanitarian aid and so on. No, how are we going to support? How are we going to show political solidarity with Haitian people who are more than capable themselves of defending themselves? How are we going to solidify their movement? How are we going to help solidify their movement? Their leftist movement, their socialist movement. They're moving for decolonization, because at the end of the day, that's what they need. They need our support so that they can transform Haiti, so that the people of Haiti aren't forced to migrate, which is what happens right now under the neo-colonial government that they have in that country. And you know, there's plenty of groups, there's plenty of organizations that we can support. We've supported Haiti Info Project, and we've also supported Haiti. What was the fund? Haiti Relief Fund.
You and Nick would know more than I would. I don't recall.
But yeah, basically there are socialist Haitian and lefty Haitian organizations that we must support. If we can't do it materially, then support them in terms of sharing their information and bringing the Haitian struggle to the forefront of our movement, of our struggle towards the transformation of the Americas.
Yeah, I want to shout out someone here in the comment section by the name of Nuestra Gonzalez. He's making some good points here. He says, USA never changed from a slaver's republic. It just rebranded itself. I think that's a good way to put it. Had the Industrial Revolution, this is Nestor again, had the Industrial Revolution not been at odds with chattel slavery, USA would be a proud slaver's republic and prior to this day. You know, so yeah, I mean, it's just, you know, it's the United States has never reconciled these contradictions. It has no interest in reconciling any of these contradictions. Even the U.S. left has never tried to really address these contradictions, and by and large, you know, does. I'm not saying none of us. I would bring it, you know, I would bring it up to the table. You know, a lot of other folks do, but let's just be even more clear. A lot of white leftists just don't want to address these issues. You know,
and it's always about, even the white left is always about how we're going to save the Haitian people. You know, we see white leftists collecting funds, thousands of dollars going into their pockets without any transparency in terms of where is it going, who are you supporting.
That's right.
How is it going to help the Haitian people? Haitian people can defend themselves, and they do defend themselves. They have their own organizations. I'm pretty sure it's called the Haiti Relief Fund, but if I'm mistaken, you know, you can DM Anti-Conquista, and we'll give you information about lefty Haitian organizations that do work on the ground, and the Haiti Info Project, which provides great analysis from a leftist perspective as well.
Absolutely. Moving right along, El Salvador was in the news. The Salvadorian president Nayib Bukele, he joked about being the dictator of El Salvador, literally changing his Twitter profile to read "the coolest dictator of the world." You know, again, we're keeping an eye on what's happening in El Salvador. You know, I personally keep in touch with someone out there in El Salvador, and I'm getting daily updates. Surprisingly enough, according to many Western media outlets, he still has a pretty high approval rating. That being said, you know, you're seeing it is dipping, and people are out in the streets protesting, and you know, a lot of progressive and socialist and revolutionary organizations unions, feminists, teachers associations, different labor groups are coming together little by little to denounce his policies, to denounce, in denouncing this president. And, it's just, the more you read about this guy, the more Bukele wants to be the king of Central America. Yeah, I mean, this guy's he's a weirdo. I don't know how else to describe this guy. He's a weirdo. He rejects, he says he rejects ideology, and he's all about implementation. That's what he says. He says that over and over. We don't know what the hell he's implementing other than it appears as though he's consolidating more and more power for himself and his party that controls Congress. This is a situation that's worth monitoring. He also doubled down on Bitcoin, purchasing 150 additional Bitcoins. For those who are into Bitcoin, you need to tell me what that means. He says he was buying the dip. So what he was saying, what he meant by that is, obviously the markets changed, had a reaction because China came out with a policy essentially banning, making it illegal, all I believe it was all cryptocurrency or Bitcoin currency transactions illegal. And so there was a huge a market reaction to that. And so he made a joke about that and say, yep, we're doubling down and buying dip. And again, we've juxtaposed El Salvador's approach to Cuba's approach, which has been much more moderate and carefully thought out. And of course, they have centralized planning in Cuba. And so, again, just this is worth monitoring. I'll stop there and wait for your response. But this guy just he's somebody that we the left needs to continue to keep an eye on because he's just it doesn't look good for El Salvador.
I think Bukele is very much, if you want to understand what AOC would be like as a leader, I think that's what we would. She would be something like that. I think it's very like showy. I think he's very trendy. He's in with like the trendy stuff, making Bitcoin. Trying to make Bitcoin the national currency, that kind of thing. Like, which to some people would it would seem progressive. But then at the end of the day, and I would disagree with you, Victor. I don't think he's a weirdo. I think he's he's just a capitalist with his own quirkiness and eccentricness, and but he's he's defending the capitalist class in El Salvador, and we need to support the Salvadoran people in their struggle against this guy. He's he's joking around. He's joking around when his actions can and do have an effect on the people of that country, to the point where people are suffering, starving, unemployed, in terrible conditions. Also, similar conditions to Haiti in terms of forced migration because of the conditions that exist there. So yeah, fuck that guy.
Yeah. Steven Tremenio just said he's a social media president, feels like a damn influencer. Yeah, and that's been his kind of his shtick. He's like the Twitter president. I
wouldn't be surprised if it was AOC's boyfriend, AOC's boyfriend who's in charge of his social media, because he's very good at it.
I failed to put this into the headlines, but I just thought about this earlier this week too. And again, for whatever reason, I just failed to put it into my notes here. He did say that off the table will be same-sex marriage and abortion, legalized abortion. And so obviously, he's doing a bunch of stuff there in El Salvador, promoting a bunch of different initiatives, but those two things are completely off the table. So again, just a guy that everyone needs to keep monitoring as he continues to consolidate power. Moving on to Venezuela, Juan Guaido is receiving heavy criticism over an alleged $1.3 billion settlement to pay a U.S. corporation over an asset dispute due to nationalization efforts by the Chavista government. This happened under Hugo Chavez, the late Hugo Chavez, actually. It's been in court for forever. Guaidó released a statement denying that the interim government, whatever the fuck that means, that he leads, has reached any agreement or signed any agreement. And so folks can go to VenezuelaAnalysis.com. It's the let's see here. There's an alleged settlement by the Delaware District Court appointed special master Robert B. Pincus on a proposed sale procedure of Venezuelan assets to meet credited demands. And it's apparently, again, it's the interim government, whatever that means, with the corporation ConocoPhillips. And so, folks can check that out on VenezuelaAnalysis.com. Juan Guaidó is denying that took place. So again, just something that folks need to monitor. This is, again, Juan Guaidó is just for whatever it's worth, he does have some amount of power, which is why the Venezuelan government, the Chavista government, is having these negotiation talks with the opposition, because the guy is been anointed, president of Venezuela. Again, he's president of nothing. He's just a guy. He's not even an elected official at this point. But he does hold a certain amount of power because, the West, these racist Western former colonial powers, have given him control over many of Venezuela's assets. It's just crazy. It's racist. It just harps back to these colonial ways of thinking, of again dictating to the Venezuelan people who their leader is going to be. It's just a very crazy situation. The next headline is a UN Special Rapporteur Elena Dugan presented a 19-page report at the UN showing that the impact, basically highlighting the impact that U.S.-led sanctions has had on food and wages, healthcare, public services, education, and gasoline shortages. So again, everyone wants to blame socialism for the problems of Venezuela. Here's a 19-page report. Folks can look this up. And it's part of it's going to be part of the official UN record. And we've even had internal documents over here at the U.S. by U.S. officials showing the same, highlighting the same, that sanctions kill, essentially. This is just an act of war. And we in the West, or folks who are against the Chavista government want to say that, it's because of socialism, which Carlos said before, which is true. Objectively true. Their economy is not a socialist economy. It's a capitalist economy. We support, the Chavista government in their efforts to try to transform that society. There's a lot of spending on social programs, but they essentially still have a capitalist economy. I'll stop there and wait for your response.
I would say it's a mixed economy, and it's different in that, in the West. So what they're doing there is, we're talking about their own resources, and that's the difference. The imperial core, the West, is capitalist and imperialist. It takes people's wealth, both in terms of natural resources, labor exploitation, and so on, and transfers it to the West and redistributes it. Yes, a lot of it goes to the capitalist class, the ruling elites. And a lot of it is also distributed among the wider society too. In Venezuela, it's different. They're exploiting their own resources. They have their own industries. Yes, capitalist industries, as well as some industries that are more socialist. The important thing is that some of that wealth is captured by the state and redistributed to make the conditions better for their people. That isn't, as Victor is saying, it isn't a socialist economy, but they're heading towards it. It's a good start.
Absolutely. I got 3 more headlines, and we're gonna call it a day. The first one is that Lula continues to have a solid lead over Bolsonaro. That's the former president of, moving on to Brazil. So former Brazilian President Lula da Silva has a solid lead over the current president in polls. And so the election is due for next year, 2022. His lead dipped, just a bit, but he's still in a solid position. And of course, again, we've been as we do these Nuestra America episodes every single week. We see how desperate Bolsonaro has been getting. Raising suspicion over the stating that the next year's elections are going to be marred by irregularities, etc. So try to again cast some doubt over a Lula da Silva election victory. So again, that's just a recent headline. I don't know if you had any thoughts on that before we move on to Colombia.
No, just to say, we really hope that Lula comes back to power and stronger in terms of his socialism. I think again, I don't think we can say that Lula or Rosa's governments were socialist per se. They were progressive. They brought about important reforms, and hopefully this time round, it looks like he's going to win. And hopefully this time round, he can deepen that the socialist ideals. And it's not just about Lula. We're talking about the people of Brazil who are pushing for this. They see Lula as the viable alternative to Bolsonaro. And hopefully it's the people that push Lula, just as Chavez was pushed in Venezuela. Chavez, when he came to power, as we know, he wasn't really that radical, to be honest. And it was the people who pushed him, who gave him permission to be like, what, yes, push it further towards the left, further towards socialism. And we know that the Brazilian people, and this is something that us as the Latin American diaspora need to pay attention to. The Brazilian people themselves, the movements in Brazil are so strong, probably the strongest communist movement in the whole continent, even though they don't have power. You have the MST, and so many other communist organizations, socialist organizations who we can learn from, and who we can support as well. And hopefully they too can pressure Lula, or at some point also come to power in Brazil and take it even further, so that they can finally transform the conditions of that country.
Absolutely. Moving on to Colombia, I came across a Reuters headline: FARC dissidents say they carried out Colombia bombing. Target was U.S. advisors. So a FARC dissident commander has taken responsibility for a June bomb attack on a military base in the northeastern Colombian city of, I don't know if I'm pronouncing this correct. Is it Cucuta?
Cucuta.
Okay. Cucuta. I don't see the accent on here. Okay. As well as the recent shooting of a helicopter carrying President Iván Duque. For whatever it's worth, a FARC dissident is claiming that they were responsible. I don't know if you got a chance to read any of that, but it says here that I guess 2,500 FARC dissidents are still fighting, with arms. So I don't know if you had a response to that.
What dissident did it say it was? What was the name?
Let's see here. Give me just a second here.
Because it could be, but we'll take it with a pinch of salt. When the news came out, when there was an attempt on Duque's helicopter, it seemed like it was not like it was set up,
right?
Like the Duque administration. This was in the middle of the protest too, so to a lot of us, we thought, nah, this guy is looking for sympathy. He's looking also not just for sympathy, but also to find a scapegoat, so he can be like, it's the FARC, because the FARC is the guerrilla of the FARC are historically the scapegoat. They
Right.
use it to be able to, pass these military and police rules where they can do whatever the fuck they want to society, because they're saying these terrorists of the guerrillas are they're attacking society, and even the president, that's what they would say. They've even attacked the president. So I'll take it with a pinch of salt. It's possible that it was the dissidents, but it might also be false information, or you are gonna have this dissidents, guerrillas, who might want to take claim for something they might have not done. Is what I would.
Right. That's always a possibility, right? So the name, it says here, Javier Alonso Velosa, or AKA John Mechas.
Yeah, I'm not too sure if that's like a legit dissident or guerrilla leader. It doesn't ring any bells to me, but it could be. It could be. But more likely, in my opinion, more likely is that those were false flags, and really it was the president, the administration in Colombia, trying to make it seem like there will be an attack, so that they could go out and repress the people further during the protest, because this was during the protest a few months ago.
And someone's asking a question: FARC dissidents that did not agree with the peace deal with the government, right? Yes, that's correct. So just to answer that question, yeah. And then lastly, on Peru is continuing on the Peru Libre Party, again, which catapulted Pedro Castillo to the presidency. They're continuing to gather signatures to call for a constituent assembly with the hopes of eventually just rewriting the Constitution. We saw this in Venezuela. We saw this in Ecuador under Rafael Correa. And so, this is our hopes are that they get enough signatures and that they're able to have this, national plebiscite to change their Constitution. I'll give you the final thoughts here, and then I think we're going to call it a wrap.
That's a good, again, a good step forward for Peru. Like you said, we've seen it elsewhere in the region, in Venezuela particularly. We've seen how important a new constitution has been for them, so that they can try and win back some ground from the elites. So hopefully they get that. And then just in general, again, emphasizing that we provide this information not just because we're intellectually interested in what's going on in Latin America, but we are interested from an activist point of view, from a revolutionary point of view. We want to use this information to be part of something, to be part of the transformation of Latin America, and the involvement of the Latin American diaspora, us migrants who live in the West, to the revolutionary movement in Latin America. So please, follow Anticonquista, join us, help us out in terms of our Patreon. But if there's any other organizations we mentioned, Telejaguar, APRP, African People's Revolutionary Party, Hood Communist, Black Alliance for Peace, all of these organizations who are black and brown organizations, who are Marxists, who are communists, but importantly also who are about decolonizing, not just in terms of our culture, but I guess simultaneously and very importantly, in terms of the material conditions of our people. We need to uplift our people culturally, yes, in terms of reclaiming our sense of dignity, reclaiming our sense of our languages, our cosmovisión, our views of the world, but also reclaiming our lands, reclaiming our resources, and transforming society in terms of bringing about a socialist revolution, which will better the material conditions of our people for dignified living, dignified work, and dignified life all around. free of imperialist meddling, free of imperialist oppression of our people, physical and economic. So yeah, please support us and all other decolonial, radical Marxist organizations out there as well.
Absolutely. Nestor, I see that you're asking a question here. Does Anticonquista have a Venmo account? We have a Patreon account. It's if you check it right here in this YouTube segment, if you just click on the link, you'll find it there. It is posted. So yeah, please like, please share, please subscribe, and definitely support us if you if it's within your means. And we definitely appreciate the support. This was a great program. I was really excited the last couple of weeks seeing all the stuff that came out of CELAC and the UN. And again, these are not just words. These things are translating into real significant change. And you're seeing attempts at transforming societies in Latin America. Again, without U.S. interference, without imperialism meddling, as Carlos just said. So, comrades, to our audience, we thank you, we appreciate y'all, and we'll check you out next week. Hasta la victoria siempre, mi gente.
Hasta la victoria. Take care, comrades.